Hi there, welcome back to the Dylan Rounds case. Welcome if you're currently here in this live video premiere. Today we do have a very serious video and a focused one on the Dylan Rounds case, on the Dylan Rounds documentary, right? Released, I guess, in recent time on Paramount Plus. You have to pay for it. It's behind a paywall. But one individual out there on YouTube, shout out to them, provided the footage on YouTube to watch. And from the looks of it, the full documentary, both part 1 and part 2. I have watched it myself, and today I want to share with you my thoughts, my analysis, what I know of, my knowledge. Does it compare or contrast to the documentary itself? Okay. I will also be doing a follow-up video some of the time regarding receipts of the theory I was talking about or pointing out about Dylan in the horse box and accidentally being hung. The documentary cut wording out to make it sound like I was the one that created that concept. That is wrong. I can provide to you the provenance of where it came from, but that will be in a standalone video, okay? Hopefully you understand that. I'll play the clip to you next time with the footage of me clearly explaining and doing it word for word what I was actually referring to. So there is context and a backstory to clear up any confusion and to reduce any further problems down the line. Be on the lookout for that video, okay? As well, this documentary has opened up new perspectives, new red flags, more red flags than ever before, okay? Stuff never heard of before, or at least I haven't, okay? So what I want to do is just give you my brief overall interpretation, impression of the documentary, how I felt about it after watching it, compared to what other people have said, okay? And then we're going to get into all the details. I bullet pointed it. I do have notes with me on this occasion because there are some quotes, important ones, there's dates, timelines, etc. And I've done it in the order, the way they were talking about it in the documentary, okay? Now, if you want to see the documentary for yourself, visually and auditory, it is available on YouTube. Links will be down below underneath the pinned comment, or it will probably be within the pinned comment if you click on view more of the message, okay? The links of the documentary, and I'll try and get it in the correct order as well. When you do watch the documentary, whether it's been changed or not at the time, don't get too confused by the title of the video that was uploaded to that person's channel, okay? It's all under control. You want to follow it in the correct order. You go into the description of the documentary, first video, part 1, and then it is posted in the correct order. It's just a title that's a bit dodgy. But to eliminate that problem, I'll just simply provide the links down below in the correct order, okay? As said, this documentary was part 1 and part 2, and from the looks of it, it's all been put together, okay? Now, why is it taken this long? I don't know, because of background things going on. I mean, the last thing we really heard of properly to do with Brenner before the court hearings, because that's been a bit of a mess, was March the 3rd, 2023, right? When Brenner was charged with the murder of Dylan Rounds and desecration. Then after that, it's gone quiet ever since, as Candice Cooley has highlighted, okay? So this documentary, to start from the end point of the documentary, March the 3rd was the last thing talked about. So we're basically looking at everything that happened before that, all the way back to the beginning of when Dylan Rounds was reported missing and what happened to Dylan happened, okay? So we're just going to get right into it right now. As for comments of previous videos, scrap that. We can't do that right now. This is serious time. This is focused time, right? Feel free to share your thoughts, opinions in the chat, but hopefully you can maintain a level of focus because, as I said, this is a serious video, this is serious information, and we need to make sense of it and understand. If any of you at any moment or time notice a contradiction, a bit of hypocrisy, misinformation, feel free to highlight it down below in the comment section. What I'm going to read to you are notes summarized from the documentary in the correct order. And I'll add on my own analysis and additional thoughts if I need to, okay? Hopefully you understand everything. As said, links down below to view previous videos, to view the documentary, to become a member, anything and all that. It's all down below, it's all under control, don't worry, right? Is everyone ready now? Yeah? Okay. So, to kick things off, the way the documentary starts, you could interpret it as quite emotional. You got the music playing in the background, and throughout the documentary you do have snippets of either video footage, photos of the area, Lucin, drone footage, the farm, the trailer, the vehicle, etc. A lot of the content which we've already seen before in the past. Some recreational, do you call it that? Recreating footage of like the boot or the key fob or the gun that's been recreated, right? It's not actually real, it's been recreated. Just like when it comes to the Grainshed property, some more up-to-date footage, because I guess the crew, Candice Cooley, whoever, went out there at a later point to film this documentary, okay? Did I see any footage on the pond? Not that I'm aware of. Did I see anything to do with the incriminating footage of Brenner? Not that I'm aware of. See, this is what's making me think, okay? Pardon me, but I know they said the documentary, part 1, and then part 2 comes after, but at least from what I saw in the documentary, I looked at the first part, went through it, there was 2 sections because the person uploading it on their channel couldn't do it as one whole video, okay? So there was like 2 videos of part 1 and then 2 videos of part 2 of the documentary. And that must be the case because when I was looking at the part 2 of the documentary, the way the video loaded up, it said part 2, like the actual part 2 of the documentary. So the more I think about it, yeah, that's the entire documentary that I saw, that you will see, and what we're talking about right now. I just really need to be focused right now because you can argue there are many, many missing details. It jumps from one thing to another and it's actually excluded Lucin Pond. It's not really talked about that. It excluded the timestamps of the phone pings. It's excluded the timestamp of Dylan's phone footage recording Brenner in the trailer. It didn't even include that. Things are missing, okay? And you will pick up on it when I do read through these bullet points, right? As I said, apologies, I just want to include everything. I want to explain everything and I want to make it as clear as possible. Hopefully you understand that. So as said, the opening of part 1 of the documentary, you can argue it's emotional because of the way the family, the parents are responding, crying, tearing up, kind of what you'd expect. I know some people would say, why are they tearing up now and not way back then at the start, like what we saw with East Idaho News? Maybe because it didn't quite kick in at the time, back then, kind of numb to it. And as time goes on, reality kicks in, and when you reflect back, that's when the emotions start flowing, possibly, okay? I know some people out there will suggest and highlight maybe family members, maybe Candice Cooley is getting upset because it's for the camera, makes it look more emotional, more manipulative. I don't think that, okay? I'm not going down that route. Other people might, okay? But yeah, across all boards, Candice Cooley did cry. Karen Rounds did cry. Denise Cooley did cry. Larry Rounds virtually cried. Justin Rounds kind of held it together, but you could tell it was affecting him. These emotions are all normal and what you would expect, okay? Just wanted to set the scene for you to understand. As said, footage was playing every now and then whilst narrating over it. Some of the footage and photos, though, may have not been in the correct order, like the search team wants. More about that later, okay? First bullet point mentioned was the last call with Justin before Dylan Rounds went missing and was taken out. Justin was saying how Dylan phoned him up and was talking about a tractor, excited about planting the seed. At the time, Justin was, I think, going to Las Vegas with his daughter or something. And Justin said in the documentary that he was getting a bit frustrated or a bit annoyed with Dylan constantly talking about a tractor, very repetitive, etc. But, you know, the conversation overall was normal, okay? It was a normal conversation. Dylan Rounds was happy and excited, as what Justin said in the documentary. They eventually, well, Dylan Rounds kind of hung up because signal was lost, and that was it. That was the last time Justin Rounds heard Dylan's voice on the phone, okay, before going missing and being killed. So you can at least say, at least it was like a happy, kind of positive, normal conversation. It wasn't one of those instant regret type of things. You get what I'm saying? Would have been nice maybe to say goodbye before the signal cut out, but, you know, it's just these last known phone calls with Dylan are important, right, in some way or another. So that's how it was with Justin. Now, the next thing it moved on to was 2022 Memorial Weekend. When did that exactly start? Well, wasn't it Friday it started, then went into Saturday and Sunday, the main weekend, and then Monday, the event was over by then. So it kind of begun around Friday and then onwards. And Nate Eaton, he made quite a bit of an appearance in the documentary, which I'm not surprised by, right? He's interviewed Candice Cooley, Justin Rounds. They've been connected in some way or another with time in East Idaho. It's understandable. So Nate Eaton narrating, talking about Memorial Weekend, saying that he received an anonymous message on Facebook requesting help to find Dylan Rounds. I've never heard that before. I've never seen of that before. That one thing was new to me. Have any of you heard it before? On Facebook, Nate Eaton receiving an anonymous message. Help us, please find Dylan Rounds. Who is that anonymous message from? I don't know. It didn't explain. Was it Candice Cooley? Was it Justin Rounds? Why would it be though? They've got accounts on Facebook, so why would it need to be anonymous? So who else would it be? Someone not on Facebook, someone that set up a temporary account, someone that doesn't want to be known. Well, if that person doesn't want to be known, are they still on Facebook now? Are they a family member, a friend, a Montello local, a Lucin local at the time? I don't know. Leave your thoughts down below. So that was the first piece of info I heard of, which I've never heard of before. Kind of interesting. Kind of sets the tone, I guess, of how things played out. If that being the case, although it didn't give the date, you'd assume it was probably on the 30th, because with Candice Cooley reporting Dylan missing on that day as well, 30th of May 2022. Obviously, that is after the Memorial Day weekend event. So if Nate Eaton is saying that he received that message over Memorial Weekend, the Saturday and Sunday, that would imply that somebody else knew of Dylan going missing before Candice Cooley knew a day before. Let's not go too deep there because there wasn't much context in the documentary about it, but it's food for thought. Share your thoughts down below, okay? Now, it kind of mentioned it in brief next. It did talk about it later on in the video. So basically, it went on to the different theories, okay? Theories, not fairy, theories, okay? I'm going to like summarize it now, but at the same time kind of add on what was being talked about later on in the documentary, right? They touched upon it lightly first of all, and then went back to it later. I made notes immediately. So the first theory that was talked about in the documentary was Dylan Rounds walking away from farming, walking away as a whole, had enough. Heavy D made quite an appearance in the documentary too. He added on by saying, was it down to partying, having a good time? Typical 19-year-old guy, having fun, being a bit reckless, just going off. Family believing that's not like Dylan. Though Box Elder County Sheriff's Office, first thing that came to their mind was that Dylan Rounds, young, not so responsible, a bit reckless, having fun, having a good time, gone off, probably will come back in a few days. That mentality led to their lack of action and taking things seriously, okay? So that was the first theory. Maybe Dylan walked away. Maybe he'll come back at a later point and he's just not responded back yet. Theory number 2, to do with Chase Venster. 25th of May, Dylan Rounds coming across Chase, not aware of who he really was at the time. Bloodied, no shoes, as told by Candice Cooley, coming out of the desert on the side of the road, wanting to be picked up. Dylan told Candice Cooley later that he didn't pick Chase up, but he actually did. Candice Cooley heard the truth later after Dylan's disappearance when talking to the likes of either Brenner, John, or Kurt Wadsworth, okay? Dylan lied originally because he knew Candice Cooley wouldn't be too pleased with him, right? But at the time, at that place, the 25th of May 2022, Tacoma Road, probably on the Montello side, right? The road does run through Montello, Nevada into Lucin, Utah. Dylan picks up Chase Venster, takes him to Montello, supposedly as told by Candice Cooley later on in the documentary. Witnesses in Montello did see Chase Venster in Dylan's pickup truck at the time to confirm things. Heavy D added on to the theory that because of the Chase Venster event on the 25th, did it lead to a motive of Chase returning back to take Dylan out as a form of revenge, retaliation. Why was that? Well, they were referring to that motive at the time before they knew of the context, okay? Back then, in the beginning, they thought Candice Cooley, Justin Rounds, etc., thought that because Dylan didn't give Chase a lift, Chase was annoyed and wanted revenge. But upon further context, that theory was dissolved. In addition, because there was CCTV footage of Chase Venster elsewhere on the day of the 28th of May at 7:01 a.m. at Snowville Flying J's, you know, that was his alibi. Of course, conflicting information elsewhere from the likes of Corey and some other people throughout time, but I'm just telling you what I heard from the documentary, okay? And what of my knowledge, what I have heard of over time on a consistent basis. And what has been said so far in the documentary, I could follow and understand, okay? Then it went into the third theory, and that was the 28th of May, an altercation between Dylan Rounds and Brenner. Justin Rounds was talking about this, okay? Take in mind, as we do go further on, and I talk about certain points or events and things happening or reappearing, although you might question it and have been critical of Candice Cooley, just take note that Justin Rounds said a fair bit of this as well within the documentary. So it's not just all coming from Candice Cooley. Justin Rounds does play a fair part in the documentary, talking for himself, speaking for himself, okay? So yeah, the altercation between Dylan and Brenner, supposedly. Brenner snapping, possibly, and then taking Dylan Rounds out on the 28th. That was the third theory, okay? After that, Heavy D kind of gives his introduction within the documentary. Heavy D saying, oh yeah, this is my channel on YouTube. He was kind of like plugging it in, advertising his channel in a way. Depends how you interpret that. Saying how, yeah, here's my channel. We do recovery, towing, problem solving, helping families out, doing good work, making people's lives better, as well as searching for some missing people. And it did show a backdrop of footage and proof of that. Understandable. Heavy D did look for Susan Powell in the past through the mine shafts. A lot of time and effort put in. Did they find her? No, but they tried. I guess he also teamed up with Adventures with Purpose in the past with Kylie Rodney, if I'm correct in saying. And then some other example was a plane crash in the mountains. And then most recent, Heavy D assisting looking for Dylan Rounds to fly by over June the 5th, 2022, I think. And then later on into the case on the Montello, Nevada side, Bald Eagle Mountain Range, assisting Lance Kelly and Ty Corbin. That footage was mentioned in the documentary later on in the video. More about that later, okay? So yeah, Heavy D made his introduction, his thoughts, his ideas, right? Then moves on to the next point. Dylan Rounds, just him farming. I said, these are bullet points. Some are probably brief, but I just wanted to note down everything, okay? Dylan Rounds, just him farming out there mainly, a big task upon himself. Heavy D highlighting that Dylan Rounds, the position he's in, he had the resources, like the money, the equipment, but it was all on him. A big task ahead of himself. A lot to do, a lot of responsibility. Really only Dylan. I mean, yes, he had help down the line, but as for taking it all on the spot and being deployed down there and trying to make things work, it was really all on Dylan. End of the day, decision making and choices, quite a lot to take on considering his age at the time, about 19 years old, right? Probably a little bit younger as well when the actual farm was purchased, right? So Heavy D was just simply highlighting that because, yeah, it's understandable. Then Heavy D referred to Montello, saying how the nearest town, you know, with Lucin being very desolate, empty, rough and rugged, the nearest town is Montello, which is about 26.5 miles away when you look at it on the maps. And Heavy D said the population of Montello is about a couple hundred. Well, from at least what I've heard with time, the population or so is about 55, 57. If there's any Montello locals watching right here, right now, feel free to add the figure in down below of the true amount of people in Montello at this moment in time. Is it over 100 or is it about 57, 55? Let me know your thoughts down below. As said, it's not a massive mistake, but just a little inaccuracy, I believe. Okay. Then, whilst Heavy D was commenting on Lucin, the area, the environment, the terrain, he said that when you're out there, although it's very quiet, technically you could feel alone, but it does feel like something is out there. Something is watching you. That's what Heavy D said from his own thoughts. Candice Cooley said at a later point on Facebook or on YouTube interview that going back to Lucin after knowing what's happened to Dylan feels eerie and silent. Understandable with it being quiet. But for Heavy D to say that it feels like something is out there and watching you, it does make it sound a bit spooky, right? I think Heavy D is referring to the bad eggs in the area that were once there, and maybe some other people that do roam about further afar. Some criminals, rough and rugged people that are considered dangerous. You're in the middle of nowhere, got no help, maybe vulnerable, and you're surrounded by those people, hiding away possibly, okay? Heavy D also said as well, within the area, you got good people, but you've also got unsavory people out there. He didn't explain who exactly at that moment in the documentary. You'd assume Brenner, Don Hatley, But anyone else? Because he did say unsavoury people, not a person, but people, more than one. But how many exact? Not quite sure. Could it include any of the Montello locals? Maybe. But all I would say is, if Heavy D comes out with that line so early on in the documentary to say that there's some bad people out there, and you're talking about a case of Dylan Rounds, it kind of ties in together with one another, right? In a way. Yeah. Anyway, let's just make sure that we're on track. Just give me a second. Okay. So, yeah, after Heavy D talking about the area of Lucin and what it's like, Justin Rounds, it cut to him sharing his thoughts. And he basically said that he wasn't happy about Dylan Rounds farming out there. Now, it was pretty brief and vague that, but at least from what I remember hearing of Justin Rounds in the past during an East Idaho News interview, it might have even been said on the second interview video of Heavy D inside the grain shed property with Justin Rounds and Candice Cooley too, back then. But yeah, Justin Rounds was saying how when it was announced and what Dylan was going to do and go down to Lucin and farm there, what Justin Rounds originally wanted was for Dylan to work under him for a little bit, maybe for a few years, just to learn the trade, just learn in general and grow and be guided in the right direction to receive tips, help, father and son. That seems normal, that seems fine and good, but it seems like Dylan Rounds at the time was focused and fixed on the idea of doing it for himself, by himself. And Justin Rounds didn't quite like that idea, which is very understandable. It's like how some parents can react, or quite a few out there. Candice Cooley, at least from how she reacted in the past, what we saw in interviews, she wasn't as restrictive. She wasn't like, oh, maybe you shouldn't do it. She was quite, I think, encouraging about it, right? But yeah, Justin Rounds, there was a quote or so within the documentary, Justin saying, I never liked that area. I knew what it was about. That doesn't sound too good, does it? See, here's the thing. You read that quote and you think, well, if Justin Rounds knew the area, what it was about, bad, rough, dangerous, that he never liked the place, then why would you allow Dylan Rounds to go on down there? Why not hold him back? Why not do something to stop it? I guess because of Dylan Rounds, the age he is, he's able to make his own decisions, I guess. Like parents can't always control you or pull you back, can guide you as best as they can. As said, I know people will interpret that point different, okay? I mean, Justin Rounds never liking the area, I can understand that because of the conditions, it being desolate, far away from towns, shops, resources, etc. It's quite demanding. The ground quality as well for farming, not so great. High salt contents, etc. Not many neighbours, not many contacts. Yeah, I can understand why Justin Rounds wouldn't like that. Okay. But when Justin said he knew what it was about, the area, what did he exactly mean by that? He knew it was a dangerous place, or he knew it wasn't a practical place for someone like Dylan? That's left open for interpretation, okay? Now, the next point, briefly or partially going on to Don Hatley. And this was narrated by Candice Cooley, who was talking about Don Hatley saying in the past he was an ex-aerospace mechanic or something. So with Don having quite a bit of knowledge in that field, being a mechanic, working on equipment, he was able to assist and help Dylan Rounds often at the time when Don was working for Dylan. So that's interesting, a little bit of backstory there. Okay, let me know your thoughts down below. Larry Rounds did appear in the interview with Karen Rounds, the grandparents of Dylan Rounds. Larry said, when referring back to the past, that often on a Sunday, Dylan Rounds and Don Hatley would hang out together at Don's place, eat food and watch TV. I've never heard that ever before. Never heard that ever before. Have any of you? With Dylan Rounds hanging around Don Hatley, does it demonstrate a pattern? It does. Although Dylan Rounds may have been independent to go out there by himself in the middle of nowhere and do farming, he seemed to have surrounded himself with older men. Did Dylan Rounds ever view the older men as kind of like fathers, but not the actual father? Does that make sense? Sometimes if you're younger and you look up to an older person because they're an adult, that they've got more guidance, that they can help you, that you can look up to them and trust them and ask for advice, seeing them as a father figure in a sense, but not in a weird way. Hopefully you understand what I'm saying there. And the reason why I say that pattern, and I don't know if it does stem back from the past, but what's been talked about by Corey and some others, right, online only, is that in the past, supposedly during the breakup of Justin Rounds' Candice Cooley, that Dylan Rounds hung out with Ed Harshbarger, an older individual, taking him on fishing trips and hanging out in general. Fast forward to the Dylan Rounds case, looking back retrospectively, Dylan Rounds, as told by Larry Rounds, Dylan hanging out with Don Hatley often on Sundays to eat and to watch TV, Don Hatley being older. And then what we heard from Lance Kelly, how almost every day in the morning time or so that Dylan Rounds would be parked up outside of Saddle Saw Bar and be hanging out with Kurt Wadsworth quite often, Kurt Wadsworth being an older male. You see the pattern. Yes, we've heard Dylan Rounds did hang out with people of his own age, like JD and some others, yep. But as for the area of Montello and Lucin, Dylan Rounds mainly and only hanging about older males, I guess, because that's all there were out there. But did it ever have a negative influence on Dylan? Not quite sure. Could it have established a friendship, a bond between Don Hatley and Dylan? Maybe, if they would hang out, laugh, joke about, talk. Who knows what they talked about, okay? It was just an interesting detail told by Larry Rounds, which I've never heard of before. Let me know if you have, okay? Then, after that, refers to Brenner. And I believe this was said by Candice Cooley, saying, when it came to Brenner, he showed no sign of concern, no sign of threat. Now, when I heard that in the documentary, I was waiting for Justin Rounds to come on in and say, but from my experience in the past, I saw a different side to Brenner. That was never mentioned. We'll get to that in a second. The one thing Justin Rounds did bring up later in the documentary was that Dylan Rounds said to Justin that Brenner, he's just a jackass, and that's it, just an idiot, that's all, stubborn and grumpy. That little conversation extract, what Justin told, was from the past of when Brenner verbally threatened to kill Justin Rounds, when Dylan Rounds was in front of Brenner at the time. Justin was not present, but Dylan contacted Justin later and said, you need to get back, you need to mend things and resolve it with Brenner because he's angry, okay? That was back then, years ago, but I thought that was an important event, right? If Candice Cooley in the documentary says, well, at the time, Brenner showed no sign of concern or danger or threat to the likes of Dylan or others, it seemed okay. And yet Justin Rounds knows himself, yet didn't mention it in the documentary, that back then, years ago, that Brenner threatened to kill Justin just because of a disagreement, and that was it. That's not good. You don't want your son to be around a person like that threatens to kill others, because eventually that threat could be aimed and directed right at your son, Dylan. And that seems to have happened, right? Maybe maybe Justin didn't see it as a problem at the time because it was just words and not action. But still, it makes you a bit cautious, right? I'm just surprised it wasn't mentioned in the documentary. Why was it not included? I want to know your thoughts and reactions on that. Why was it never mentioned in the documentary that Brenner in the past threatened to kill Justin Rounds? That story was told by Justin Rounds in the first place on the second Heavy D interview. Why was it never mentioned again? Was it on Heavy D interview or was it East Idaho News? One or the other, okay? It's still available on YouTube if you wish to check back on it, okay? Anyway, next point. Nate Eaton comes in and says Dylan told Karen it was starting to rain, but he needed to get his grain truck out there. Right, so this is like skipping on. Take in mind that when watching the documentary, the dates seem to drag on from event to event. Take that in mind. So when Nate is talking about this, Dylan told Karen, so the phone call made at 6:51 a.m. 28th of May 2022. Dylan told Karen, besides I need to park grain truck in the shed, that it was starting to rain. If it was starting to rain and that was at 6:51 a.m., then would that imply that the witnesses at Little Pigeon Mountain camping out there overnight following into the 28th, that they stayed there till 6:51? I wonder. Because, first of all, the witnesses who were at Little Pigeon Mountain at the time on the 27th night time, witnessing Dylan doing his seeding, his farm work late at night, 27th, Friday, May 2022. That was not mentioned in the documentary whatsoever. Why? Why not? Why was it not included? Not relevant? I thought it was pretty relevant. Maybe at the end of the day, the documentary can be only a certain length and they can't cram everything in, so it's done vague and holistically. But what I will tell you is, it's okay for someone like me to watch it because I remember all the details from the past by Candice Cooley and Justin Rounds on all the different interviews. But if you're coming in for the first time ever and watch that documentary, you're going to be missing out on so many key details and timestamps, okay? That's why I'm doing this video and trying to fill in the blanks as we go along based off my previous knowledge and what I've heard of in the case, okay? So 6:51 a.m. phone call made by Dylan Rounds to Karen Rounds saying it's starting to rain. If it's only starting to rain at around 6:51 a.m., what was happening beforehand? Because the witnesses at Little Pigeon Mountain near to Dylan's farm said it was raining hellaciously in the early hours of the morning. They did not give a correct time stamp. Montello locals said in the early hours of the morning it was raining there and then maybe later it rained in Lucin. But what type of timestamps, time frame are we talking about? You get what I'm saying? It just doesn't seem to quite add up. If it only started raining at 6:51 a.m, then before that, the witnesses out there at Little Pigeon Mountains must have been present up to 6:51 to say, oh, it's raining badly. And if that was the case, then why haven't the witnesses said anything about, oh yeah, we saw Dylan Rounds getting in his grain truck and then driving off from his farm up to the grain shed? Why did they never mention that? As I said, we never understood or found an answer as to how long were the witnesses there for on the 28th, right? We heard about the day before, nighttime, witnessing Dylan farming at 11:30 p.m. to about 11:45. But what about the following day? You know, how long were they there for camping? Did they pack up and go early hours of the morning, or did they go after lunchtime? It's important because they are present there at the place at the time, but no further context there, nor Not even mentioned whatsoever in the documentary. So another missing key detail, okay? That's why I just wanted to mention it now. Anything else? Yeah. So now we move on to the 30th of May, okay? 30th of May, Candice Cooley called Box Elder County Sheriff's Office and filed a missing person report. Is that a normal thing to do? I guess so. It's being, resourceful, on the spot thinking. There was like a comment recently in the live video premiere of my video where someone said it's the mama bear instincts, maternal instinct, I guess they were talking about. When you sense that something is wrong, act on it. If that's your gut feeling, do something about it. And I guess that's what Candice Cooley did. Now, why was that call made? Well, simply because back on the 28th, Dylan was supposed to be returning a call back to Karen Rounds later on in the day. Never did so. Karen was wondering what was wrong. Went into the next day to see if there was any calls made. I think she tried making a call, but went to voicemail, so wondered what was up. Family started asking about, have you heard of him? Have you had any phone calls, text messages? Nothing, radio silence. That's where they became worried. 30th, Candice Cooley, Justin Rounds, went on down to the place. And that's when she filed a report to Box Elder County Sheriff's Office and reported Dylan Rounds as missing. So, to be fair, Candice Cooley did act on it quick, unlike the police, the LE, with time. At least acknowledge that, right? So, once Candice Cooley and Justin Rounds arrived at the place, the property, as said in the documentary, both of them first went to the grain shed. And that was on the 30th of May 2022. Candice Cooley, Justin Rounds, searching the grain shed, I guess, looking about in general to see if anything is present. It didn't explain to what extent searching about, right? They didn't give like a true explanation there. But I think one thing to highlight is at least they were present in the area before June the 2nd of the spring cleaning with Brenner. So that would mean Candice Cooley, Justin Rounds on the 30th of May were on site at the grain shed property, maybe inside at some point, and that supposed evidence was present. If they looked in the right area at the time, they would have found that evidence before June the 2nd, before the spring cleaning of when Brenner took it away and disposed of it. The family was so close to potential important evidence, yet they were unaware at the time. So that kind of sets the scene there for where people were and where they first went, okay? Next point mentioned in the documentary, Justin Rounds, at the time, when on site, didn't feel too worried at the time. Justin Rounds at first was thinking maybe Dylan is elsewhere working for somebody else, custom farm work. And, with Dylan being a farmer, being busy and taking on several tasks and roles and doing custom farm work beforehand, which lasted for 6 weeks before going missing, it kind of makes sense. You're in that area environment. Though that worry did eventually kick on in when they found other things. Before we get any further, the next point mentioned within the documentary said that search pics used incorrectly in the documentary, winter pics used as the 30th. Right, so what I just read there was a little note made by me, because after what Justin Rounds said, they were talking about how they contacted the Box Elder County Sheriff's Office, where 2 detectives or so went down at some point, and then which then led to one of the detectives contacting search and rescue, and that's what led on to the searches of the property and area at the time of when Brenner started getting a bit agitated, okay? But when they were talking about that in the documentary, narrating it, the photos they showed on screen were incorrect. The photos that they showed on screen was of just before winter time, the big final push before winter of Candice Cooley, Justin Rounds, Mob Crew Chris, K9 Unit, Texas Equisearch, and a deputy sheriff or something. Those photos happened months later, yet they were used in the documentary to describe the search and rescue at the beginning. So it's kind of incorrect there. Well, it is incorrect. But I think they probably just used those photos for like a rough reference point to show people searching about, because probably they didn't have photos of the original search taking place. So I get that, but I just wanted to provide to you the backstory behind of where those photos originated from and when they came about, okay? So that was mentioned. Then it moves on to Justin Rounds, his thought process changing at the time of what could have happened to Dylan, saying he then thought that maybe Dylan was caught up in a farming accident. And even Candice Cooley kind of suggested that as well. And it's like reasonable thought process, right? If Justin Rounds initially thought, oh, Dylan probably doing custom farm work elsewhere, and then it starts kicking on in, well, he's not coming on back, it seems too quiet, there's no sign or indication. Could he have got hurt in one of the farming, jobs or something? Yeah, I get that. Candice Cooley said her first thought at the time within the documentary, well, Dylan could have been hurt, that likely Dylan could have walked back to his farm, 5-mile distance. Supposedly Dylan Rounds used to do it in the past. Candice Cooley was saying how it could have happened again and that Dylan could be out there, tried making his way back to the farm, got injured and needs rescuing. Could have been bitten by a snake due to the wildlife, okay? But Candice Cooley said, or he could have fallen into a wash. Now, from the grain shed property, walking back in a diagonal type line to the farm, would you be falling into a wash in that direction? Because I thought the wash was north up that way, unless it bends down slightly further on, I think. But I'm sure I remember Candice Cooley in the past saying that Dylan Rounds could have fallen into a mine shaft, and that's why the mine shafts were checked by that private team. But then in his documentary, Candice Cooley says maybe he fell into a wash. So that's different to what Candice Cooley said back then. It's not a major difference, but I have noticed it, okay? Falling into a wash, surely you would see that. That's bigger than a mine shaft, right? A mine shaft opening can be small, a wash is pretty wide. Unless you trip off the end or, I don't know, get distracted and fall in somehow. But that's what Candice Cooley was thinking at the time. And like how it was mentioned in the past, Candice Cooley said you could walk from the grain shed to Dylan's farm, and Dylan would do that in the past and walk kind of in a diagonal line. But Heavy D said that because of the rough, rugged terrain and, the footwear needed to be, you got to walk in straight lines. You can't be crossing on over because it'll tear you up. But Candice Cooley was saying how Dylan Rounds was able to do it then. I guess different opinions at the end of the day. Anyway, that aside, moving on, Candice Cooley and Justin Rounds. That was mentioned next. And this was said by Justin Rounds. Just for context, there is contradiction coming up. Make sure to listen. Justin Rounds said, after the grain shed property, we went on down to the dirt mound. Interesting for them to go in that direction specifically, directly at the dirt mound. Interesting. Considering you'd had to have walked past Brenner's trailer as well. But yeah, Justin Rounds in the documentary saying that he and Candice Cooley went to the dirt mound and found the boots. Okay. And that's when worry, panic kicked in. Foul play possible. Why are the boots there? They're Dylan's. What's happened? Okay. That's where the worry kicked on in. Candice Cooley added on by saying her opinion and thoughts are that the boots were thrown out there on the 30th of May 2022, earlier on in the morning before Candice Cooley and Justin Rounds arrived at the property. Just her thought, her opinion, not proven. But I think she thinks that way because Candice Cooley said the boots that were left near the dirt mound were fresh, recent. And if it's fresh and recent, it would make sense it being done on the same day, okay? But why on the same day? Why would someone like Brenner, because the fingerprints led to him picking them up and putting them out there, okay? Why would Brenner put the boots at the dirt mound or behind the dirt mound on the 30th? How would Brenner know that Candice Cooley is coming on down? How? How would he know? Let me know your thoughts down below about that. Did he receive a tip-off? Did Brenner get tipped off by someone? I mean, if Don Hatley received a call from Karen Rounds on the 29th of May about, have you seen Dylan, what's up? Maybe Karen may have said, right, Don, we're coming on down, or Candice Cooley Justin are coming on down. And then Don said to Brenner on the 29th, they're coming on down, you probably should move those boots. And then Brenner decides to on the 30th in the morning time. Makes you think, right? Interesting. And then Candice Cooley adds on saying that Bucks Elder County Sheriff's Office, that they found the boots. Do you see the contradiction there? Justin Rounds says he and Candice came across the boots. And then Candice Cooley says herself that Bucks Elder County Sheriff's Office found the boots. That doesn't quite add up, does it? So a little bit confusing there, but that's just how it was worded in the documentary, okay? Then the next location they went on to, and I believe this is all within the same day. It's all within the same day on the 30th. Candice Cooley, Justin Rounds, went down to Dylan Rounds' farm to check on the trailer, to check on Dylan's pickup truck and see if Dylan was down there. And whilst down there, an officer was on site, present, as from what was told in the documentary, okay? And basically, Candice Cooley, Justin Rounds were kind of debating, should we break into Dylan's pickup truck, smash the window in, because it was locked, which was unusual. Dylan Rounds supposedly would never lock his vehicle, okay? So after some kind of debating, the officer present basically allowed Justin Rounds to break the window. I think what was mentioned in the documentary that they asked the officer, you know, can we? And the officer said, well, you just do what you need to do. The fact that an officer was present on site and sat back, allowed it to happen, key potential evidence, that's not good. I've never heard that before though. In the past, I heard about Candice Cooley, Justin Rounds, one of which breaking into the pickup truck, but not the fact that an officer was on site. I never heard that before. So that's interesting. Because you could say, oh, Justin Rounds, Candice Cooley to blame for breaking into the truck. They should have known better. But to receive a green thumbs up from the officer that it's okay to break into it, then it's kind of the officer's fault. You know, you should say, well, you need to stand back. This is a missing person case. We've got to treat it with caution, okay? Don't be touching anything. Yet the officer was quite withdrawn and just let it happen. So Justin Rounds broke entry, the back window of the pickup truck, looked inside. The gun wasn't there, okay? Any other details mentioned? No. Even though we have heard the details in the past. The additional details were that the seat was adjusted forwards, so it must be a shorter person in the driver's seat to be behind that wheel, if they were adjusting the seat for that reason. Anything else? That all-wheel drive was turned on, even though it doesn't work, so that was a bit odd. Details like that weren't included in the documentary, okay? Only the focus on the gun at that moment in time, right? And we do talk more about that in a second. Just give me a second. Here we go. Right, so I think that's kind of like how it ended, or so. The portion of it went on to the next part within the documentary. Not part two, but the YouTube channel that uploaded the videos. They did it in like portions, okay? So after looking at Dylan's pickup truck, both Justin and Candice Cooley then go to search the trailer to see what's going on there. Not much shows up, not much of interest at that moment. And then following into the next day, the 31st of May 2022. Now, this is kind of interesting because not at any point is it mentioned about Kurt Wadsworth. Kurt Wadsworth's name is never mentioned in the documentary. Interesting. Saddle Sore Bar, not mentioned in the documentary. Just the town name Montello. Because on the 31st of May, that's when they did receive that call from Kurt Wadsworth about Dylan Rounds supposedly being held hostage in Montello by Chase Venster and Aviles. But that didn't air or make an appearance or was talked about in the documentary. It just was ignored, blanked. Maybe it wasn't mentioned because it never actually happened, Dylan being held hostage. What's the point including fake news in the documentary? Considering Kurt Wadsworth originally heard that info, a tip-off from a psychic reader, and later on in the documentary of Dylan Rounds, they do refer back to psychic readers as being pure BS. Maybe they wanted the documentary to be as factual as possible, which led from one thing to another. Just let me know your thoughts down below. They could have at least acknowledged about the call made by Kurt Wadsworth and that hostage situation being a dead end, false call. They could have at least highlighted it, right? But that aside, one thing that was mentioned though, that on the 31st, Candice Cooley, Justin Rounds were ordered to move away from the Grainshed property by detectives who came on down to the area. But Candice Cooley, Justin Rounds had a right to be on site at the time. They were allowed to, yet the detectives ordered them to move away. A bit weird in a sense. Missing out on some opportunities of observing police behaviour at the time and what they get up to. Yeah, you're missing out on that opportunity. A few additional points that were mentioned, carried by Denise Cooley, Karen Rounds, Candice Cooley, that the area wasn't taped off. The grain shed wasn't taped off, the perimeter wasn't taped off, and eventually that led to DNA being destroyed. Now, once again, another critical point which is not mentioned in the documentary whatsoever, but it just ties in with what was said then in a very vague way. When they say the likes of DNA was destroyed, they're kind of referring to inside of the grain shed property, okay? And also another location. A brief backstory behind that. A few months ago, Candice Cooley in the East Idaho News interview, the last one, said how there was two key hits, two key locations over the course of months where cadaver dogs reacted in such a way that there was a scent that belonged to Dylan Rounds, but no forensics were ever done, no data was ever collected, so any DNA in those areas went to waste, lost, game over. Okay, so I think that's what translates to what was mentioned in the documentary about DNA being destroyed. Wasted opportunity because it wasn't treated properly as a crime scene and it wasn't taken seriously at the time, and because resources weren't fully utilised, as we've heard in the past, like the cadaver dogs early on, the drones, it kind of prevented, more evidence being collected. And, too little, too late, right? Because at a later point when more action may have been taken, previous evidence DNA was lost. So that's not good, right? Moving on. Denise Cooley, which what's about to be said, kind of in quotes, I've never heard of before. So be sure to let me know your thoughts. Denise Cooley was interacting with one of the detectives on the side of a road, and the detective said that any healthy white young male doesn't, what's that, don't make presidents or something. Basically, a healthy white young male isn't on the important list. That was a response by the detective when Denise Cooley was like, I want you to look for Dylan Rounds. I want you to actually do something about it. And the detective was like, well, because Dylan is supposedly healthy, because his skin colour and race is white, because he's a young male, he's not that important. He's not on the hierarchy list. But a contrast to who appears top of the list is a younger, blonde female like Kylie Rodney. That's what was being talked about in the past by a few people, and maybe even Candice Cooley or Justin Rounds. I can't fully remember, but it was more so online discussions from different people and viewers, saying how the Kylie Rodney case at the time received more attention. It was more favourable by the police, it was a more popular case, and it was just simply because of the characteristics of the missing person. Young, blonde, female. Whereas Dylan Rounds, being a male, being white, not that important. I mean, that form of discrimination, if you call it that, makes a change for once, aside from the BLM bandwagon. You get what I'm saying? So it kind of changes it up a bit. If that was a true response from that detective at the time, Denise Cooley said she couldn't remember the person's name, so that's unfortunate. It does highlight potential corruptness within that force, the authorities, which isn't good. Doesn't paint a good picture on them when it comes to dealing with the Dylan Rounds case, right? As I said, never heard that quote or experience encounter mentioned before, but there you go. Next point. Detectives at the time on site at the Grainshed property, out and about, but they didn't find anything odd. Nothing too strange, but they were still with the mentality that, Dylan Rounds has probably gone out somewhere, walked away, that's about it. No evidence on site at this moment in time to suggest foul play or anything like that. Right. And yet they had access to the Grainshed property beforehand. On June 2nd, they could have found that evidence that was taken away by Brenner later, but they didn't find it, so that's another missed opportunity there. Within the documentary, what was mentioned next was by Justin Rounds, and it was in quotes, talking about Chase Venster, okay? And to cut it short, Justin Rounds said Chase Venster used meth. Is meth short for methamphetamine? Maybe, maybe not. But basically, Chase Venster, used substances at some point or another, right? And obviously, if you use substances, there can be side effects, and that can tie in with his paranoid behavior at times and criminal actions from back then, when you look back at his criminal history, okay? Justin Rounds said that type of person fits the profile within the case. So what that shows early on, that Justin Rounds may have thought that Chase Venster was a key suspect, right? Chase in general was treated as a suspect at the start, but Candice Cooley did say in a later East Idaho News Channel interview that Chase was never a part of the investigation to begin with. It was a completely different investigation, gun charges. So it must have been a mix-up there in the early days, bit of confusion going about. But, the concept, just to add on with my own thoughts, okay, with Justin Rounds saying that Chase used substances, and we've heard about Chase's backstory, how he's impacted people negatively. It doesn't fit well if Dylan Rounds is in the presence of someone like that, especially at the time where Chase Venster could be feeling side effects in some way or another. Volatile, threatening behaviour, physical, who knows on the 28th if Chase Venster was around. But as said in the documentary, it did excuse him, saying that he was elsewhere at the time, Snowville. But it didn't mention the exact location or the timestamp in the documentary, which is unfortunate. Don't know why, but there you go. As well, it then focused more on Chase with his criminal history, highlighting it in a cinematic way, saying he's been involved with larceny, assault, cruelty to animals, and a bit later on, domestic violence. Okay? Have we seen any examples of that? I mean, we've heard reports, we've heard stories. I mean, when Salty Pancakes went to Chase Venster's homestead in Montello somewhere at some point, that a dog or two was found in a hole and it was kind of covered over as well, which was a bit odd. And that the chicken coop, dead chickens, I guess that could be considered animal cruelty because it's neglect, not feeding them, not, helping them, it's just letting them starve. It's not exactly good, is it? So, and if Chase has done it in the past as well to other animals, yeah. Are those crimes by Chase as a result of being under the influence of drugs? Possibly. I think I saw Corey leave a comment somewhere suggesting that Chase was okay at times, but maybe when under the substance, it changed him as a person. Okay, so that's what was talked about. We move on to the next part within the documentary. Tying in with Chase Venster, Nate Eaton narrates over 2016, a key moment with Chase, that 2016 Clinton, Utah, even though it didn't mention the word Clinton, but I did read the news article from the past on my channel. You want to look back at a past video, I covered the article of 2016 and Chase Venster. In the documentary, it's described as a police standoff with Chase lasting 10 hours long. Chase locking himself in his home at the time, armed with several firearms, a bulletproof vest, and one grenade, which could have gone off. Why did all that happen? I think because he was paranoid at the time, may have been under the influence or just withdrawal or simply side effects, either way, of substance use, right? And that standoff lasted quite some time. It was eventually resolved, but, quite an extreme case. As it was told in the documentary by Nate Eaton, that the reason why the police went to his location in the first place was because of domestic physicality issues with people out there. That could tie in with Corey and her comments about Chase Venster's ex-girlfriend and his son, how they were treated physically not so good in the past. We did hear in one of the previous official news articles in the past that Chase Venster also broke a protection order on the girlfriend at the time. So yeah, messy times, bad actions leading to repercussions, and then a standoff eventually. For Chase Venster to be armed, it can make him deadly. Was Chase Venster ever in the presence of a firearm on the 28th? I'm not sure. Yes, he was on CCTV elsewhere, Snowville, 7:01 a.m, and then later on KFC Clinton, and then later 10:30 p.m. in Ogden, Little Caesars Pizza Place. But, did he have a firearm on him, concealed, or earlier on? I don't know. You combine Chase Venster with drugs and firearms, that's a deadly cocktail of disaster, right? So it's just like these little pointers you look at, right? And I just wanted to add on my thoughts too. Now, later in the documentary, it then shifted to the idea of the gun and the key fob, okay? So be ready, be prepared for that right here, right now, okay? So mentioned, I think, by Candice Cooley, saying that J.D. Wild, Dylan Round's best friend, found Dylan Round's gun in the trailer, okay? And the clip of the firearm was found by the side of the gun, and the gun being on the bathroom countertop, I guess like a shelf or surface or so. Does this tie in with Corey's comments in recent time? as what we've seen. Kind of. Now, let's just mention it very brief, okay? Just very brief. I can do a dedicated video on all this another time about the argument of, was the gun and key fob taken in the first place, or was it never touched? I do have a video on that. Fast, steady, it's all under control. You don't have to worry about a single thing, okay? But the recent comments by Corey was that two of Dylan's friends or something, or was it two of Dylan's brothers? I think it might have been two of Dylan's friends, went to the trailer, found the gun originally, took it to the grandparents, and then the grandparents told them to return the gun back, and that's what happened. Candice Cooley, Justin Rounds, has never mentioned that before, specifically. But what was mentioned in the documentary that told by Candice Cooley, one of Dylan's best friends, JD, found the gun in the trailer but did not touch it. So it kind of ties in line with what Corey was saying about a friend approaching the trailer and coming across the gun. But nowhere in the documentary did it say anything about the friend taking it away and then returning it back. Not the friend exactly. Okay, just take that into mind. Okay. I mean, for JD to be down there, that's kind of good, because I know people were saying, you know, Dylan Round's friends, where were they when Dylan went missing? Did they care? What were they doing? Well, it clearly shows that JD was on site at the time, wanted to look for himself, coming across Dylan's handgun, the trailer clip out on the bathroom counter. Okay. So, yeah, that what I just mentioned occurred on the 1st of June, okay, 1st of June, at least from what was worded in the documentary, okay? And that's to do in relation with the gun being returned back. 1st of June, or the night time approaching 1st of June, likely someone returned back to the trailer, Dylan's farm, and placed it there. Then 1st of June, JD comes on down to have a look and then finds it. Candice Cooley highlighted, and Justin, that because of the clip was out of the gun on by the side of the gun, that was odd, because Dylan Rounds would never normally do that. I mean, maybe other people discharge their loads when in like a safe environment because they don't want to harm anyone around. I get that. But if Dylan Rounds had a certain routine and he stuck by it, for it to suddenly all change all of a sudden, not just the clip being out of the firearm, not just the vehicle being locked, not just the seat being adjusted, not just the all-wheel drive being turned on, but, you know, all that at once. That's too many sudden changes in the likes of Dylan Round's routine. If the likes of Weezer makes comments on Bibbins or someone out there, how their routine changed after Dylan Rounds went missing, never used to drive through this area but now suddenly does every now and then, frequently. Why did that pattern change? Don Hatley on the 29th or a bit later going down to the bar in Montello, Cowboy Bar or something, and then talking to friends of Weezer's, which he would normally never do because he doesn't know those people. Why these sudden changes in routine all of a sudden? It doesn't make sense. If people believe that, then they should acknowledge Dylan's routines changing, especially if it was multiple of them in one day, from the looks of it, right? So yeah, 1st of June, gun returned. And then in the documentary, it then said on the 2nd of June, but the key fob was returned back. Okay. People previously said online, were those items ever taken away to begin with? Maybe they were misplaced, or people who were searching about didn't find the stuff at the time, only later. But one extra detail that was interesting was that when JD found the gun on the bathroom countertop, that's all that was there, the gun and the clip. That June 2nd, the key fob was returned in the same place as where the gun was put. So if you come across the gun one day, but nothing else is there, then the next day you come across the key fob where the gun was, it's been added since. But why not at the same time? Why was it not added at the same time? Why spread it out? Very weird, very strange, right? Mysterious. So yeah, as I said, we can do a dedicated video to that, but that's just how it was worded in the documentary. Okay, gun and key fob originally being taken away and then returned back following the 1st and 2nd of June. Okay, put that there for a second. And then it moves, I believe, into part 2 of the documentary right now. Okay. Kind of works backwards because at the start of the part 2 documentary, it says Friday 27th, Dylan Round called Denise Cooley. Never called back after that. I guess that was just like a little semi-introduction, catching back up on the Dylan Brown's case with it being part 1, part 2. Sometimes you get a little brief recap at the start of each episode, if you get me. And that's kind of like what it did. So you're getting all these family members getting these final calls of Dylan Rounds at different times, and Dylan never returning the calls back because he wasn't able to physically because of what happened to him. But this was Friday 27th. Denise Cooley received a call from Dylan about Dylan never called back. Why did he never call back Denise later on Friday or early in the morning of the 28th? Maybe because Dylan was so preoccupied with the grain truck in the grain shed that he could only call one person at a time because he was so focused, maybe. Just look at these different possibilities, right? Anyway, the part 2 documentary of the case starts, a little recap and so on. And then it says, put evidence back overnight. Yes, that's what Candice Cooley highlighted, that if those items, the gun and key fob, was to be returned, it would have been done overnight, most likely. And then what's mentioned in the documentary, saying Box Elder County Sheriff's Office, they got a hold of the gun and the key fob, okay? Everybody in the chat, everybody watching right now in the background, make sure to listen. What was stated in the documentary, that Box Elder County Sheriff's Office successfully received Dylan's gun, firearm, and key fob, and upon inspecting it, DNA test, no fingerprints were found upon those items. No fingerprints at all. Candice Cooley originally said that. People didn't believe her. And then within this documentary officially stating Box Elder County Sheriff's Office received those items and found no fingerprints upon those items, what does that imply? What it implies is either the person handling those items in the first place were wearing gloves, so it didn't lead to any fingerprints being added to those items, and or whoever got a hold of those items in the first place and then returned them back afterwards cleaned them with some kind of cleaning product to remove any evidence. For no fingerprints at all to show up on those items, that's odd, right? What should have remained was Dylan's fingerprints on the key fob, considering Dylan would have used his pickup truck days beforehand as he was going in Montello and going about to Idaho and stuff, supposedly, to get parts and fetch them. But for no fingerprints to be found on the key fob at least, it must have been cleaned down by somebody else who wanted to clean their own tracks because they were in possession of that item at some point or another, decided to return it back and wanted to ensure that the prints did not track back to them, so they cleaned the items. See, this is exactly what I've been talking about in the past, but some of the salty pancake viewers with time, maybe a little bit delusional at times, didn't listen to me when it came to wording and language, okay? I just wanted to highlight that point, okay? Next thing to talk about, Heavy D comes on in. And what I'm about to say, observations by me. Observations by me, what I mentioned back then briefly when looking back at a photo a still photo. And I said to Tom Evans and Indiana at the time in the chat, let me know if you remember, hey, you see Brenner's trailer door during the flyby over, there's a gap in it. It looks like he's peeking around the door to see what's going on. You remember that? Well, that ties in with kind of what's going to be talked about here, in a sense, okay? So in the documentary, Heavy D comes back on in to talk and narrate, referring to the flyby over in the early days of the case when the crew of his got involved, chatted with Candice Cooley and her new husband as to what was going on and stuff. I think the flyby may have been June the 8th or 9th, something around that point when the video was uploaded onto Heavy D's channel. And when they were doing a flyby over, Heavy D said he noticed a red flag. That when he was hovering over the Grainshed property and Brenner's trailer, it was as if Jim Brenner pretended that he couldn't see the helicopter, that he was trying to keep cool, play it off, not react. That Heavy D said 9 times out of 10, or the majority of the times where he would be flying over in a helicopter, people would look up or be interested as to what the noise is, what's going on from above. But Brenner played no role or part in taking interest, kind of blinded it, right? Heavy D didn't state if Brenner was outside of the trailer at the time. He could have been inside of the trailer. It might tie in with when I said how it looked like he was peeking around the corner of the door, and that's why it was half open slightly. Either way, Brenner, a little bit sneaky, scurrying away in the shadows, hiding away, or trying to play it off cool and not react, not appear suspicious, not appear scared. Heavy D saw that at that time as a red flag. I've never seen or heard this ever mentioned before until now. This is very interesting. As said, this is one of many independent, well, not many, but this is one of a few videos I can upload in the future as a separate one and show to you what I was talking about, and we can focus in on it. So don't worry, I will make note of that, okay? So yeah, there was that. As well, Heavy D then started talking about in the documentary about Dylan could be in a mine shaft somewhere if he fell down or if he was taken there. That we searched Bald Eagle mountain range and then played the footage of Ty Corbin and Lance Kelly within the footage of Heavy D's video and crew when they were all searching about, because that's when they all met up at the time. And that was Bald Eagle mountain range, Montello, Nevada. Okay, do you remember that? It was on Lance Kelly's channel. I think it's still up on his. It was also a part of Heavy D's own video. I think Heavy D's video coverage was more cinematic and shorter in length. Lance Kelly's footage was almost like behind the scenes of Heavy D and his crew, you know, talking things through and setting things up. It was more raw, it was more natural. It was quite an interesting video to watch at the time because of the environment, it being inside a cave, dark, spooky, enclosed, but they all managed to fit in. Another thing that wasn't mentioned in the documentary, but it was mentioned in Heavy D's video, more so Lance Kelly's point of view, is when they were in the mine shaft at the time, and Lance Kelly and Heavy D were having a conversation whilst Alan from Mountain Labs Fortress was descending down a hole in the mine shaft within. They're having a back-to-back conversation about Dylan Rounds and Kurt Wadsworth, that Kurt Wadsworth may have groomed Dylan. And Lance Kelly was suggesting that Heavy D was agreeing as well. That was never mentioned in the documentary, but I'll tell you what, when I mentioned that conversation between the two back then, it triggered people. The likes of Tucker, the likes of Tiffany Taboo, the likes of a person called Graham, somebody else out there, and then another individual, maybe a Rose or a DP, I can't remember exactly who it was, but those type of characters got triggered when I started talking about that stuff. And it wasn't coming from my mouth, I was relaying what those guys were saying back then, but it definitely touched a nerve. And sometimes when you touch a nerve, maybe you were on the right track. You never know. As said, there was some context missing, but I guess they couldn't fit it all into the documentary at the time, right? Now, we move on to the next part. the fairies, the conspiracies, that type of stuff. This part I'll do a separate video on, okay, to prove my side of the story, my video, the context behind it, the theory itself, and the providence of it, okay? What I do want to say is, I wasn't the only one. Other people were included within it. All the different spirit box and psychics mentioned, as we've seen, the BS people, but as well, a clip of Zav Girl who looked more like this when listening to Salty Pancakes talk. A few more clips of Salty Pancakes talking. There was a clip of Black Dove talking on behalf of Dylan Rounds and Fairies. That was used in the video. Anyone else? Obviously I was used as well, because I seem to be the only one that shows my face on here. That when I was included in the documentary, my face was on screen with the red robe as well. More context on that in a second. And then some other people were mentioned, okay? And I guess it was the section of the documentary where it's talking about theories, concepts, how it can disrupt the case, how it can hurt the families, how it can cause problems, how it seems as if people are trying to help, but it's not actually doing much good, okay? But because of the way the clips were used, it was done to paint a negative light on YouTubers in general, that YouTubers aren't good individuals. But I'll tell you something that's kind of interesting. Although these YouTubers and people like me were called out, in a sense, in the documentary, right? Lance Kelly wasn't mentioned at all in the documentary. Ty Corbin was never mentioned in the documentary. Kurt Wadsworth was never mentioned in the documentary. Jim Terry, Mr. X weren't mentioned at all in the documentary, but supposedly they did not want to appear in it. Is it because they were scared? I don't know. But it's interesting how people like them weren't used in the documentary, but someone like me was, and I wasn't even asked. So interesting there, but then again, you got to understand someone like Jim Terry, Mr. X, well, not Mr. X, screw Mr. X, but someone like Jim Terry played a more direct role in communication with the family in the early days. So I guess there would have been more communication there in the background, but chose to opt out. But Lance Kelly, Ty Corbin, considering Candice Cooley, Justin Round's views, more so Candice Cooley only, views on those two, not mentioned in the documentary. Very interesting, right? But this documentary crew doing their research poorly, looking on YouTube, looking at random clips of conversations and discussions to suit their narrative of theories, conspiracies, as well as showing a few additional videos when scrolling down on the search bar, some of which are of my videos in general. But yeah, that's just how it was. But it was done like more so with me. It showed the clip of me sat here with the red robe on me and me saying the words, Dylan Rounds accidentally hung himself in the horse box. There was more to it than that, but the documentary crew decided to just use that sentence by me to make it seem like I'm the one coming out with that theory. But it wasn't, it was Bob Farrell. And I can demonstrate that in another video when I was talking about it at the time back then, okay? But you see how the documentary spins the narrative to suit their agenda, okay? I do agree that there are conspiracies, conspiracy theories, silly ideas, such as Bigfoot, such as UFOs. Even Candice Cooley, Justin Rounds highlighted that at the start, right, as being ridiculous. Yet, what I find interesting is the narrative and focus on theories and disruption is all on the YouTubers' side to blame for. And yet for Candice Cooley, Justin Rounds to say UFOs and Bigfoot are ridiculous, yet they weren't mentioned in the documentary, clearly shows that there is a bit of an agenda going on. I'll tell you one other thing. Another person that wasn't mentioned or included in the documentary or even in the process of the theory section was Doug No Thanks. And I guess that's because Candice Cooley has been interviewed by Doug in the past. So kind of in the good rule book in favour, so they're not going to be included or tarnished in that way. I mean, for Zav Girl to make an appearance in the documentary by that crew, despite Zav Girl being caught up in a controversy with the autopsy photos, doesn't look too good, does it? One thing I do want to say is, which I do find kind of awkward and a bit funny, although it's not appropriate at this moment in time, everybody in the chat, that video clip which the documentary crew used was the same clip where I was whipping someone, and I was mentioning King Samoan as well in the video. So did the documentary crew watch a video of me whipping people virtually? I'm surprised they didn't include that in the documentary as well. Wow. It's what I mean, it's a little bit dodgy, okay? Then, besides that, it started talking about the psychics, psychic readers, tarot cards, spirit boxes, and it was narrated by Justin Rounds, him inside of a moving vehicle talking about it, saying psychics made no sense. It was pure crap. It was a load of rubbish, okay? And then it showed little clips of some woman with long hair saying that she is some kind of, what was it, paranormal comedian or medium, but the way she said it, it sounded like comedian. And I said, what's so funny about ghost? I guess that was just a pun there, but yeah. And then some other guy. It'll probably be the psychic readers you saw in the early days of the case. As I said, I think most of them were BS. It didn't lead to any success. It didn't lead to Dylan being found, okay? That can be problematic. The thing is, there's a difference between talking about theories and ideas like my channel and then other people out there on YouTube further afar who come up with theories, may turn them into facts or events and be very confident on them, and then direct the family about it and say that they know something when they don't. That's disruptive. If you're simply talking about it amongst yourselves, how is that wrong? Many people will do that all the time, maybe privately with their friendship groups, etc., or family members. The only difference here is that I'm talking about it public and openly and honestly on a public platform, right? And just because there's a following, an audience behind me to a certain extent, that's what makes it all bad, because people could be led astray within the case. But I feel that people can think for themselves, at least here on this channel, right? But as said, documentary has a certain agenda and pushing it in that direction. Unfortunate, but it is what it is. Though I can provide my side of the story and clear things up, that'll be in a future video. Bear with me, okay? So yeah, a few different individuals made an appearance, even Black Dove in the video. I wonder if Black Dove, what does Black Dove think about it? Will it bring him back? I don't know. But that aside, moved on to Karen Round's grandmother talking, in quotes saying that Box Elder County Sheriff's Office never been on top of the case. Never really gave it much, and that they didn't give any instructions, no instructions given by them, no direct action taken in that sense. One thing that wasn't mentioned though by Candice Cooley is saying how Box Elder laughed at her on site. Candice Cooley didn't even mention about, was it Cade Palmer or one of the other sheriffs confronting Candice Cooley in Lucin with his wife at the time of 2-on-1. Neither was that mentioned in the documentary. Maybe it's small details, can't include everything, possibly. Candice Cooley did say, though, that Box Elder Sheriff's Office or Box Elder County Sheriff's Office are still ignorant to this day. Now, I don't know personally when the documentary was created or when some of the interviews took place. We heard about it back then months ago, right? Maybe April time or even before that, right? And she said, oh, part 1 is coming soon. Never happened. Part 2 is coming later. But when? Didn't really happen. And it's only more so in recent time when it's all come about. So I guess there's been delays and stuff. So if Candice Cooley is actually referring to Box Elder County Sheriff's Office being ignorant to this day, like now, then that's not too good. So just wanted to highlight that, okay? But yeah, with that lack of direction, instructions given, and being quite relaxed. Oh yeah, if you want to break the window, you can do. If you want to take that vehicle away, you can, but that distance, 100 miles of Dylan's pickup truck, is lost after that point. That detail wasn't mentioned in the documentary though. I wonder why. That aside, we move on. We go on to some key dates, which you'll be familiar with also. June the 11th, 2022, an arrest warrant on Brenner, taken in by police and then released the next day, the 12th of June. Then Justin Rounds starts talking in the documentary and says how when it comes to Don or Jim, because of the people in the area at the time when searching and how the events unfolded at the time as well, either one of them likely responsible who put the gun back. No talk about the key fob specifically with Justin, but more so with the gun, either Don Hatley or Jim Brenner. Okay? Also, thing is, when people talk about pronunciation, Justin Rounds said Don Hatley, not Hatley. I've said both. I said Hatley in the past and I was accused of saying it wrong. So if Americans can't even get the pronunciation right, then what hope is there? Okay? But yeah, the idea of Don or Jim being responsible for putting the gun back, I guess ties in line with conversations what we've heard of already, but more so it was with Brenner. The last time Doug interviewed Candice Cooley, it was Doug that highlighted, could it be possible that Don Hatley played a role in helping Brenner by clearing up after himself? And Candice Cooley was like, there's just not enough evidence to suggest that. All the focus is on Brenner. And yet Justin Rounds thinks that Don Hatley plays a role. Though that's kind of consistent with what we've seen with Justin when he's called out Don Hatley in the past on Facebook, so there is that. Obviously, none of those outbursts were mentioned in the documentary because it would make Justin Rounds look bad, okay? I get that. And it might harm the case in some way. Anyway, moving on, next point mentioned by Justin Rounds, saying that Brenner said Dylan at some point in the past was bragging about the money he had, that he was a spoiled kid and he didn't handle the equipment correctly with respect and caution. And to be honest, that kind of ties in line with what we heard in the past by Justin Rounds when Don Hatley, Brenner and Dylan and somebody else working for Justin at the time were all in one place at Justin's shop repairing a vehicle or something. Dylan Rounds was elsewhere. Don Hatley and Justin were having a private conversation. Don Hatley and James Brenner having a private conversation. Justin Rounds in the back, listening in on the cameras and the audio, and Brenner was highlighting his jealousy towards Dylan because of what Dylan had and what Brenner didn't have. So it was kind of like that, okay? So I think that's what was influenced there by what Justin was saying, though that context wasn't given in the documentary, just like the time way back in the past of how Don Hatley was first introduced to Larry Rounds, Karen Rounds and the Rounds family. None of that was mentioned in the documentary about the farming incident 2020 winter time. None of that was mentioned, nor was the 2021 time of what I said before, Brenner and Don having that conversation at Justin's shop and Brenner showing that jealousy and hatred towards Dylan and Justin being present to witness it. That wasn't directly mentioned in the documentary either. But as said, maybe they couldn't fit it all in. But I remember it because it has been talked about before by the family, okay? Then transitions on to Heavy D, saying how Jim Don could have taken things from Dylan at a point in time, that could have been the motive. That with Dylan having all the resources but being by himself, somewhat vulnerable, the likes of Jim or Don could have had the power to take things from Dylan, physical items, equipment, money, whatever it may be. Felt there was a certain opportunity, chance to do that with Dylan being by himself, which then also led to death, taking him out to then get a hold of his equipment and items. That was one of the theories by Heavy D. We have highlighted that possibly in the past, that motive, but Candice Cooley seemed to crush that and say, no, that's not the motive. When it came to money, Dylan Rounds didn't have much money in his wallet. Every month he would have about $140 and that was it. That's what Candice Cooley said back then on the East Idaho News Channel. And that when it came to Dylan Rounds and the check, one supposedly for $17,000, which we've heard recently, and that was from Randy, some custom farm work for him, $17,000 a check. And then the other one was for the other custom farm work. I guess Dan Iverson, 32,000 check or so. So 2 separate ones, but they were in checks and supposedly cashed in. As for owing money to anybody, none of that was mentioned in the documentary. Maybe it's because they didn't want to include BS, I guess. Anything else? Yeah, then it started going on about Don. So this was it by Candice Cooley? Responding. Oh, no. This one by Candice Cooley. I think that might be later on, okay? But everybody in the chat right now, pardon me, what I'm about to say, everybody in the chat and watching in the background, make sure to listen in once again, right? It said that Don Hatley did not respond to an interview request for the Dylan Rounds documentary. The Dylan Rounds documentary crew reached out to Don Hatley for his side of the story, to share his thoughts, an opportunity to clear up any confusion or suspicion, etc. And Don Hatley did not respond back. That's the same thing what happened when Justin Rounds in the Heavy D interview at the Grain Shed was when Brenner inside Weber County Jail tried making a call to Don Hatley. Don Hatley wasn't there to answer the call, and afterwards Don Hatley didn't bother responding back and I guess forgot about it. What was that conversation back then? What was Brenner trying to tell Don Hatley? What was that call about? We never knew, we never found out. No answer. A mystery. The same outcome with this. Documentary crew reaching out to Don Hatley for his side of the story, doesn't get in touch, doesn't respond back, doesn't appear in the documentary. Well, that's a little bit suspicious, isn't it? Red flag. Now, it's not just that. Brenner, it was mentioned in the documentary that Brenner declined to comment as well, to share his side, his thoughts. Okay, maybe he is the main one, the guilty one at this moment, but even Brenner wasn't willing to talk. So for Don Hatley to keep his mouth shut and Brenner, the only two from the looks of it within the area, seems a little bit suspicious, doesn't it? Now, what about Kurt Wadsworth? Why did Kurt Wadsworth not appear in the documentary? Is it because he was in trouble elsewhere? Is it because he just didn't want to make an appearance? I wonder. I mean, if Kurt Wadsworth in the past was not willing to take a lie detector test, and maybe that ties in with why he didn't want to appear in the documentary either. Or maybe the crew or the family didn't see Kurt necessary to be interviewed, I guess. Yeah. But you see these like little red flags, how the likes of Don Hatley not wanting to appear in the interview of the documentary. That's weird. If Don cared about Dylan Rounds, if Don was innocent, then surely you would do what you can to help and reduce the risk of being treated as a guilty person, right? All this does is create more red flags in general, okay? So after that, in the documentary, Candice Cooley saying that on site, she was present. Candice Cooley was on site at the Grain Shed property on June the 2nd, okay? So Candice Cooley was present there at the place at the time to witness Brenner inside the shed moving stuff about. From what Tom Evans said in the past, what he heard of was Candice Cooley was at the gate using binoculars. But what's mentioned in the interview is that Candice Cooley herself was on site, in sight of the shed, in sight of Brenner. And recall the same story, what we've heard before. Brenner doing his thing, sheriff officer comes on up and asks him what's he doing. Brenner says, spring cleaning, getting rid of trash. Officer walks away and that's it, end of. And then Nate Eaton adds on saying how the bags were put on Brenner's truck and then drove away afterwards and disposed of them. And that was it, game over, evidence lost. But for Candice Cooley to be on site, which I needed confirming because I never really got that confirmation in the past. I mean, Corey, I think, suggested it recently, so that's something. But for Candice Cooley to be on site in presence of it happening, why did Candice Cooley not say, hey, Brenner, what are you doing? What are you doing over there? Stop. Why did Candice Cooley not say to the sheriff, You know, you're not going to tell him to stop. This is a crime scene. What the hell's going on? Did that happen? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But at least for Candice Cooley to be present, that's good to witness what's going on with Brenner. But what is disappointing is it's a shame Candice Cooley herself or didn't get somebody else to monitor Brenner. Why did Candice Cooley, if she was on site at the time and Brenner was taking the bags to his vehicle, why did Candice Cooley not just walk on over to the vehicle and then start looking through the trash bags? If anything goes, if it's a free-for-all, if it's supposed to be a crime scene but you can touch whatever you want and move things, then why did Candice Cooley not just walk up to Brenner's vehicle and look inside of the bags when Brenner's vehicle, his trailer, is very close to the Grangeshed property? Why not look in the bags at the time if you're on site? If you think what's going on is wrong and the police aren't doing anything about it and they don't care, then go up to the bags yourself, look inside and think, evidence, police, come over here quick, evidence in here, Brenner's getting rid of it. That never happened. Why not? I don't know. Weird. It's very weird that. That's what I wanted to know. That's what I wanted, confirmed, because with being present could have led to action being taken. And yeah, it wasn't. So that's a shame, that. Anything else to highlight here? Pardon me. Red flag. 21st of June. Warrant. Yeah. Okay. What's that? Oh yeah. Apologies. I think I forgot one thing. Yeah. Apologies about that. So I'm just making sure I'm in line with one another. Candice Cooley on site of shared June 2nd. And then what followed next, mentioned in the documentary, the 21st of June, that a second arrest warrant was out there on Brenner to do with the firearm charges unrelated to the Dylan Rounds case, because before 21st of June, it was Don Hatley that reached out to the FBI, surrendered in that .22 caliber rifle and other guns which Brenner told him to keep a hold of, grassed on Brenner. That led to Brenner being arrested, okay? Not to do with Dylan Rounds at that time. I'll tell you one thing that isn't mentioned and never mentioned in the documentary is that before 21st of June, 18th, 19th of June, Dylan Rounds' phone was found in the pond of Lucin. That wasn't mentioned in the documentary. That is literally a key piece of evidence and it wasn't mentioned in the documentary. What's going on there? Unless there's a part 2 later on somehow, somewhere, but I didn't see it in the documentary what I watched. So what's going on there? Because the phone and the pond have been heavily talked about in the case, yet not talked about in the documentary. Makes no sense. As for all the timestamps and phone pings, none of them were mentioned in the documentary. Even when it said that Dylan made a call to Karen Rounds in the morning, it didn't say 6:51 a.m. When it said that Chase Venster was elsewhere, not in Lucin, it didn't say 7:01 at Flying J's Snowville. It didn't even mention the final phone ping being 2:51 p.m. at Lucin Pond. None of that was included. It's very vague, as I said. But anyway, moving on, it kind of went backwards, right? It was referring back to the 30th of May 2022. Candice Cooley called Don. So I don't know why it was said in this order, but that's just how it was, okay? Take in mind, this is another potential red flag. Get ready. So on the 30th of May, Candice Cooley, obviously going on down in the process of reporting Dylan missing to Box Elder County Sheriff's Office, Candice Cooley called Don Hatley, I think first of all, and said, I'm on the way to Lucin, Don. I'm going to be reporting Dylan missing. And Don Hatley said, roughly in quotes, yes, it's okay for you to do that now. Why was Don Hatley giving Candice Cooley permission to report Dylan Rounds missing? Was it because Don was saying, right, I've searched about, I can't find Dylan, you can now call and refer to him as missing because he's nowhere to be seen? Or was Don referring to that as, you can do it now because enough time has passed by for someone like me and Brenner to dispose of Dylan? Bit of a red flag. Bit weird for someone like Don Hatley to give the heads up, to say, to give permission for Candice Cooley, Dylan's mother, to report her son missing. Seems a bit odd, doesn't it? bit of a red flag, possibly. So there was that. Then, next thing, Candice Cooley saying that Jim Brenner said on the 30th Dylan didn't know how to use his firearm. That was alongside what Justin Round said previously, which wasn't mentioned in the documentary, that Brenner was coldly and coolly speaking that Dylan accidentally reversed into Brenner's horse gate near the grain shed, and that's angered him slightly. That could have been the subconscious snap behind what Brenner did to Dylan. Wasn't mentioned in the documentary though, even though Justin Rounds has said it before in the past. Odd. But the only bit that was mentioned besides that in parallel was about Dylan not knowing how to use a firearm and Brenner saying that. Considering how firearm charges are related to Brenner, separate from the case, and considering the potential that Dylan may have been shot, for the firearm discussion to come into play on the day of Dylan being reported missing seems a bit inappropriate and random, as Candice Cooley said in the documentary. It was a bit out of the blue to just randomly come up with that. Why would you just suddenly call Dylan Rounds out for being useless with a firearm? Is that some kind of subconscious mirroring of Brenner being the one to be able to use a firearm properly and get the job done, shooting Dylan? And he deflected it onto Dylan by saying, oh, Dylan, he just can't use a firearm, which basically means I can, and that's what I did to Dylan to prove it, in a form of snapping. You get what I'm saying? Random conversations like that coming into play out of nowhere at a time of, bad things happening. Is it some kind of subconscious thought of what actually took place earlier on in the day? Days before, 28th. Makes you think, right? And then next, Justin Rounds started saying that he thinks that Brenner may have knocked him out, and Dylan pleaded and got back up or so, stand his ground, and then Brenner finished him off. Candice Cooley was saying he may have got shot, but Candice Cooley did say that Dylan Rounds wasn't the type of person to back down. He would stand his ground and fight if he needed to, verbally or maybe physically. Okay. And then Heavy D finalised it by saying Dylan, out, where he was out of place. He shouldn't have been there. And I think a few general viewers will probably agree with that too. And then after that, a little bit more talk, family getting emotional once again, people crying, which is understandable. And then it ended basically saying that on the 3rd of March 2023, the only 2023 event mentioned in the entire documentary, that Brenner was officially charged with the murder and desecration of Dylan Rounds. And then the documentary ended. So there wasn't any talk in between about early 2023, the pond being dug up or dredged or drained. That wasn't mentioned. And there wasn't any talk about in 2022, 19th of June, phone being found at Dylan's. And there wasn't anything being talked about in November 2019, 19th of November, when the police finally came across that digital forensic deep dive into Dylan's phone, which then depicted on the 28th of May 2022 a 27-second timestamp at 7:27 a.m. of Dylan's phone inside of Brenner's trailer, pointing towards Brenner with blood on Brenner's shirt and sleeves and hands, which belonged to Dylan. Incriminating evidence, a massive breakthrough, which led, I believe, to Brenner being officially charged with the murder of Dylan. I think that was the catalyst, that one piece of evidence. And yet it was the one piece of evidence which was not included in the documentary. Weird, isn't it? What I would say overall, whilst some very important points weren't mentioned whatsoever, which is very bad and not helpful towards new viewers coming on in for the first time with impressionable minds, that's not good at all. That's very bad, okay? There's been some key points which I've talked through today which have never been talked about before, which are very interesting, and red flags which I've never heard of before until now. So, at least from my perspective, from what I originally knew of compared to what I now know, it's kind of filled it more in together, right? But I know for other people coming on in for the first time who may see that documentary will only get one side of the story and have missing details. Okay, I get that. As for the zombie horde and other people out there that were absolutely disgusted in the documentary and thought it was a complete waste of time, and maybe some viewers on my channel thinking it's a waste of time, I don't think it was a complete waste of time. At least for me, it was good because it added new details in which I've not heard before. Those new details that have been added in now, have they contradicted to what I previously knew of? Not really, because it's its own independent things, okay? So it now leads to new video ideas and new coverage on the case. Theories, not conspiracies, okay? Appropriate language and wording, unlike other people out there. Consistency, 365 videos made on a case and still going, okay? Last Centurion standing, Warlike Wrath has it somewhat under control, despite the poor treatment by YouTube towards me and everything going wrong with me on YouTube. I still got videos to make, whether it's the good time or not, right? Still got to cover it and will cover it and will keep the case alive in a natural way, okay? So let me know your thoughts down below. Links should be down below. If they're not there immediately, give me time, deep video, time put in, editing, publishing, everything. It will eventually appear in the comment section. Just be patient and let me know your thoughts down below. If you do have questions, feel free to list that down below as well. It was a deep video. It was a heavy video. This was all done in one take, okay? Not a single edit, not a single cut. This was all talking, all on the spot, okay? That's it. Yes, on this occasion, notes were included, but it had to be done to be able to recall things and use it as a prompt, and the quotes as well. You want the accuracy to be there, so got to follow through with it accordingly. So we're going to leave it there for now. Links down below. More videos to come. I'll see you next time. For now, goodbye and good night.